Thank you everyone for joining. It's been, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years since I've had any presentations offline, so it's so cool to see everyone like live, not online. Well, my name is Roman. I'm software engineer at our iOS team, mostly working on our iOS keyboards, our editor. Had to add some facts about me on this slide, but I spent all my time looking for a photo where I don't have sunglasses, and I failed. So let's move on then. Let's look at the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about snapshot tests, like what it's all about if you haven't worked with that. We'll talk about the development flow with snapshot tests and SwiftUI previews. Then we'll jump into test cases based on SwiftUI previews and like how can you adopt them and how we came up to that idea, and about test auto-generation. So a quick look at snapshot tests. I'll obviously ask a question. Is anyone who's using snapshot tests on their project? Okay, less than half. And is there anyone who used snapshot tests and then abandoned them? Okay. That's positive one, yeah. What are snapshot tests? Well, snapshot tests are basically based on unit tests in iOS, and then they allow you to compare two images of your UI, like between iterations of your changes in your project. So you generate two images, like one you store in your repository, second you generate whenever you make changes, and you basically compare them like pixel by pixel if anything changed, like any view moved, any constraints like become enormously like not satisfying your requirements, and so on. And what are the benefits of snapshot tests? Well, first of all, of course, people, if you use a snapshot test, explain that you can compare that your UI is stable on all devices and all sizes. Like UI is stable iPhone 12 Pro Max, on the smallest SE, on minis, on iPads, and so on. But additionally, people always forget about the extra stuff. First of all, it's like light versus dark mode, because always come up those cases where something is not handled on dark mode, you miss some colors, and when you have an image representation of that, you can obviously spot that. Then you get major iOS updates, like every time the new iOS comes, iOS 16, iOS 17, or so on, you get some changes which just don't depend on you. You get new layout in stack view, you have some other updates which just change your UI completely and just broke you something. And snapshot tests will help you to easily get that. Additionally, we have accessibility settings, because people also forget to run snapshot tests for different accessibility settings when you have larger content size, when you use, for example, bold text, or you have something with reduced transparency, and so on. Additionally comes some extra cases on iPad, which is split view, or the floating mode of your app, which, for example, you can forget about. You can just hardcode something if it's iPad, VZ size, but if it's an iPad in floating mode, it already has to look like an iPhone, and it can also be missed. And some also rare cases where you can use snapshot tests, which are some app clips, app extensions like widgets, keyboards in our case, and so on. What kind of snapshots do we have for our keyboard? Well, when we say about keyboard, people usually think like that's just 3 rows of keys, like buttons, QWERTY, XYZ, emoji, button space, and that's all. What do we have to test here? Like one image, uppercase, lowercase, and dark mode, obviously. But in fact, we have about like thousands of possible states of how our keyboard can look like. Because first of all, we have different layouts, because you can have QWERTY, or you have QWERTs, like for example in Germany, or AZERTY, like people you have in France usually. Additionally, you have different return keys depending on the text field. So it can be search button, it could be regular return, it could be continue, or any other buttons. You can have extra settings for additional emoji button, period button. You can have state where you have force nudge when you move in space between letters. You have number pads and URL states, and many other states. And even more combinations come when it comes to the iPads, because here's an example of our keyboard, how it looks like on all iPads, which are like iPad like 9 regular iPads, iPad Pro 11, and iPad Pro 12.9. So there's completely different layouts of the keyboards. And if you're a user, if you switch from the native keyboard to some third-party keyboard, you expect the same quality and the same experience, that you will have all those flick keys, all the locations of returns, and all other buttons. Otherwise, you won't just use it, because who would use a keyboard when you get used to something and you're just forced to use something worse? which is why we had support all iPads and to just look just like native keyboard. And iPad keyboard is also configurable because when you, for example, pick the iPad Pro 12.9 and just change the layout from QWERTY to AZERTY, we see a completely different setup where we have smaller shift, we have like 2 rows for enter button, which is actually have a long story about that, maybe for like a separate speech for that. And that was only the keyboard, like the replica of iOS keyboard. While we have even more in our keyboard extension, like the cards itself, the completions, mini alerts, a dozen of states in G button, emojis, and many other stuff. So, well, let's talk about the snapshot test flow that maybe you have, we used to have. Before we start, let's talk about how actually to set up snapshot tests. Basically, we don't have snapshot tests in Xcode by default, so we have to use some third-party solution. And the most popular one, like there are 2 of them, which I want to highlight, but maybe use some others of them. First one is by actually Facebook, but now maintained by Uber, which is iOS snapshot test case. And second one is Swift snapshot testing by Pond3. So basically, you just add the dependency into your test target and just work with that, how it's written in the documentation. Yeah, the second one step, you would have to have either a separate scheme or a test plan for snapshot tests, because you probably wouldn't want to run a lot of snapshot tests when you want just to test something like your bundle for unit tests. And like we chose the test plan, which like kind of felt best for all the cases. And the third one, we have to have a Git LFS, because if you're gonna have all those images stored in Git, you will have completely, it will just break your Git because you will have to check out from one commit to another, which will just make a div for the entire image, instead of just loading it by its ID from the remote storage. So yeah, Git LFS is just must-have for snapshot testing. Okay, so coming back to the developer's flow. First of all, how we like create UI. Let's imagine we have to create some UI, right? We create in a SwiftUI or like UIKit or AppKit view. Yeah, we create some models, some mocks, for example, for it if we need them. Then we start developing. We develop in our UI, edit buttons, labels, and obviously to make it quickly, we don't want to launch the app. We start adding SwiftUI previews because it's faster. We just create the view, we create SwiftUI view. We don't depend on any app launch and extensions at all. Then we want to test the UI, and obviously we need, for example, in our case, snapshot test that will just render that UI, like fix that UI representation in our repository, so that we could compare that later. That's all. We record snapshots, we create a commit, and we push all the changes into our repository. And if we focus on the second and third point over here, generally it kind of feels that we're doing the same way, like the same thing, because we just have to first write the Swift UI preview, which will obviously cover most of cases that are interested for us. We want to see how our view looks on a small size, on a large size, in light mode, in dark mode, but eventually we do the same in snapshot test. We also cover all those tests, like all those cases in our tests. Yeah, and that's how we came to the idea, what if we just use our Swift UI previews and somehow make them to be like our test cases for our snapshot test. Yeah, and before we start, I just want to highlight what dependencies we actually have, because some code may get you frustrated, and just wanted to let you know that we're using Swift snapshot testing by Pond3, just because we kind of enjoyed their implementation. And we're also going to have a view inspector in our code. I don't know if anyone used that. Generally, it's a framework which allows you, for testing purposes, extract all the hierarchy of SwiftUI views, and, for example, search for some exact specific SwiftUI view in the all view stack. And additionally, if you're still not using SwiftUI previews for UIKit or AppKit code, so like you're writing a code and you don't benefit from SwiftUI previews, I really recommend you to visit our engineering blog, and we have a page where we explain how to integrate SwiftUI previews with your AppKit and UIKit code, and what challenges you may face, and how to solve them. Okay, and additionally, we're also going to have some small code part which is called UIKit preview, just so you wouldn't be confused what's it all about. It's just a wrapper of the UIB representable, which just renders some UIKit view and applies some layout devices and display names for it. Okay, so let's have some coding part. Let's imagine we have some UIKit view here. So it will be some keyword status view, which we'll have some sort of view model which represents some status. And that view obviously has some SwiftUI previews. So we are just having some view out there, and we create SwiftUI preview, and in a group with those exact UIKit previews, where we create our view, fill it with some view model, and then return it. And we will see some sort of a view in our Xcode. Okay, so we finished development, now we have to write snapshot tests. And what do we have here? We are create the view, create the view model, fill it, insert it. Kind of feels like duplication. Whoever sees that, I think whoever has written the same code always thought like, how can I avoid that duplication? And so actually, to get rid of these steps, we turn this into this. Basically, almost nothing changed, yeah? But we added the snapshot test case wrapper view outside of that UIKit preview. And let's see what it's all about. Well, first of all, snapshot test case is nothing but just a wrapper, just a custom view that does nothing but just, like wraps our code that we want to test in a test case. And then we can just inspect our previews, like we get a previous view. We run inspect using the view inspector framework, and we find all views of snapshot test case. So basically, it is only possible, obviously, in UI in debug environment. So we find all snapshot test case views. We extract the actual view of that snapshot test case, which is our view that we want to test, with all the parameters, layouts, sizes, and so on. And we just run verify snapshot, which is just going to run our snapshot for this site with the exact name. It can be described in multiple ways. You can make inheritance, it can be like some base snapshot test case, and you can make some exact Hebrew status view snapshot test case from that. But you still have to write the code, yeah? So even though we kind of made it so that we define the snapshot test class using test cases from SwiftUI previews, that's really cool. But we still have to write the code. Like we still have to define the base class, and then every time we create a new view, we have to write that class, store it somewhere in some file, multiple files, like anywhere else. So yeah, and the question obviously, if the tests are already written, why we have to like redefine them? Just copy the name and just inherit from base class. Why we can just automate that? And that comes the test auto generation. And when it comes to auto test generation, I know maybe the first thing that goes into your mind, it's probably sorcery. They're gonna use sorcery. He's telling us how to use sorcery. Why wouldn't we hear that? Yeah, we thought about sorcery, and it's kind of interesting tool. Yeah, it helps a lot. But if we're talking about it like just a project where people never use sorcery, never wrote stencil code, it definitely has slow integration time because you have to understand how to write those templates. You don't use Swift unless you use stencil for Swift, but you still have to know the syntax of that. You have a separate template which you have to maintain and support. It's also a third-party dependency which may somehow stop working on a new Xcode or just after an update. And it's still a file. Either you don't store it and you have a risk to lose those snapshot tests, or if you store it in Git, you get a Git conflicts. And what we decided to come with is to get rid of all of those issues by generating our test cases in runtime. So basically, whenever we launch our test suite, we are getting our test case in runtime. So it's just generated in a runtime by Swift, basically. Yeah, and we just using Swift for that to define a dynamic base class. We don't have any templates, no third-party dependencies, no configurations for any generation step. Like we don't have to generate, like to write a new config for each new target that we create. And we don't have any Git conflicts because we just don't store that information in our Git. Yeah, so what is a dynamic test class? Basically, it looks like that. We have some sort of a class which is called dynamic test class, test case, sorry. And all it does, it has to like insert in our test case some tests. Have anyone used Quick and Nimble over here? Yeah. So basically, if you use a framework, you've seen that you don't write any test like called test and something else. You don't write those functions. You just make a spec, and first time Xcode doesn't detect any tests. But whenever you run actually the test suite of Quick and Nimble, it in a runtime appends tests into your test suite. That's what we actually do. Whenever the default test suite is triggered, which is triggered only once, we insert some tests into our test case by that function, which is kind of empty right now. And after that, we're going to inherit this dynamic test class, and we will add some function called verify snapshot test case. What it's going to do? We're going to have some sort of test case provider It's just details of implementation, but it can be done in any other ways. It's a provider which has our exact previews, which you've seen previously, which allows us to inspect those previews, find all snapshot test case, and just run snapshot test function for all those test cases. And yeah, the snapshot test case provider, basically, it's just a protocol which allows us to mark exact SwiftUI previews which we want to test. Because you may have some very complex SwiftUI previews or some otherwise very simple SwiftUI previews that you don't want to have images for. So you kind of use it as custom protocol instead of just using preview provided from SwiftUI. You kind of decide for yourself what tests you want to have from SwiftUI previews and what you don't want to have. Yeah, and how do we get a list of classes in runtime? Generally, we use Objective-C for that. We just call Objective-C copy class list, which returns us a list of all classes which are currently available in runtime. And after that, from all those classes in a class list, we iterate looking for a provider, so basically for a class which conforms to the snapshot test case provider. And that's it. We got all snapshot test case providers which have their previews for snapshot tests. And that's all. We, in our populated dynamic test case, we just search for the provider and then add dynamic test into our class. Yeah, and the last thing you have to do in all test bundles that you have, it's either one test bundle, or if you have separate bundles, you just have to do it in each of them. You just create a snapshot test class and specify what kind of bundle you want to test, and that's all. Basically, that's all you need for that implementation. And that's what you get. As you can see, we have runtime tests, like they are marked like runtime, and they just get generated whenever you create some, whenever you run the tests itself. We have some tests for some payments, for tone detection, and all other stuff. Yeah, and so here's our final flow, what we get here. First, we create our UI code, right? It already has SwiftUI previews. When we create our SwiftUI previews, we decide if we want them to have snapshot tests or not. Which, if we want to, we just easily mark them as snapshot test case. And that's all. We just run a record once, commit our changes, and push to repository. Yeah, so let's have some more summary. I would really suggest using snapshot tests to validate your UI after you change your code, because it helps you see exact changes visually after you modify your code, or your environment gets changed, or any changes occurred in your dependencies, especially if you don't control them. You also should use SwiftUI previews because it really helps to develop your either UIKit or AppKit views. And obviously, like I've shown, SwiftUI previews are the greatest candidate for test cases as test case for your snapshot test. And I'd really suggest avoid sorcery or any YAML code generation and just prefer the native runtime test generation to use to generate your test cases. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roman.
Check.
Thank you, Roman.
Okay, nice.
Any questions?
Thanks for the presentation. Actually, I like it a lot, and I like the approach you decided to go with less dependencies, and that's very nice. Have probably the main question for snapshot test cases is for other tests. What do you do with flakiness, and what is the main source of flaky snapshot tests in your case?
Yeah, for flakiness, for some reason currently we face some issues on our CI. Because we have stable snapshot tests, they always run on our local machines. It works on my local machine as well. Yeah, but at some point we just mentioned it's either something with CI, with the configuration of the Mac Minis, or with the framework that we're using for snapshots. But some snapshots are generated in a lower scale for some reason. That's the only thing that we mentioned recently. We just didn't discover the reason yet. But before that, it came after recent Xcode update, probably after Xcode 14. Before we never had that issue, and we didn't have flakiness. The only flakiness also was introduced by M1 because it changed the way it renders, and you might have some differences in small pixels. But in most frameworks, it's already fixed by adjusting it's a precision of how you compare those images. Yeah.
Right. Maybe another question. What about performance of snapshot tests? You have local CI set up, and how fast is for a developer to run one or a set of tests?
Yeah, well, here we have a completely different flow because we don't really run those tests locally. We fully rely on CI. So you just write a test, you can generate it, just run it on that specific test, and that's all. You push it on your Git because we have like several modules because we don't have all in one test module that we run all possible snapshot tests. No, we have frameworks which helps us to run snapshot tests only for that parts of code that we need. Yeah, and then we push it on CI and we expect that CI is passing. Yeah, sometimes I can tell you the truth, I just push my tests on CI waiting for them to be finished. I see tests that failed, it generates me those exact images and I just download them and commit them, that's all. Yeah, that helps a lot. Of course, if they are valid enough.
Thanks.
I can add one thing to that. I don't really mind. We're running also snapshot tests. We're running per test for 5 devices. On our CI right now runs 0.2 seconds in average, one test.
One test 0.5 seconds.
0.2 seconds, sorry.
For each test.
For each test.
How many tests you have?
200.
200. That's nice. I don't have an option to check right now, but I can check it after this, like maybe in 10 minutes and come back to you. Yeah.
So I just wrote down our 200 tests plus our 1,000 unit tests takes 5.1 minutes altogether with building the app in before.
Okay, cool, interesting one.
The common issue with like dynamically generated tests with XC tests is that if those tests fail, they point to the wrong direction, the wrong place in your code. Have you resolved this?
Yeah, we kind of the snapshot test case class it. I don't remember if it's included in these samples, but generally we just had we just passing the file and line of where it was called, yeah, and it passed through the whole hierarchy of providers, assertions, and it just gets passed inside of the snapshot library. So whenever it gets called and we see an error appears not in the base class, not in the snapshot test class, but it appears in a SwiftUI preview when it was defined.
But if it crashes, you can still see the stat trees of it, like which one crashed, which one crashed?
What would be the reason of crash? Like, I mean, it's about tests. So if you mean like if tests getting crashed or like the UI code gets crashed.
Yeah, this can crash.
No, the regular crash is still going to be the crash. Yeah, it's just exception. But if the test gets failed, you will see it on the place where test was. Yeah, because it's not an assertion and not a fatal error. It's XC test, and XC test is working according to the file and line that you are passing. You don't pass by default, but you can just do it manually.
Thank you for the presentation. A question: what is more stable, the previews or your tests?
Interesting one. I would say, you just got me on guard. I think I would rather trust snapshot tests because if they fail, that something goes wrong because yeah, you probably receive some results in simulator that you don't get in Xcode, even though it runs the same simulator. But yeah, who knows?
Because we just suffer from a lot of issues from previous, quite hard to keep them alive. And in this scheme, seems like previous, these snapshots could be much more stable than the previous itself. Maybe if you have snapshots, maybe previous could be not so necessary. You could just see your the screens, what you have on the pictures, and if you have some issues, fix them.
Yeah, but SwiftUI previews allows you just to modify your code like you're working with HTML or React.
Yeah,
you just change line. It doesn't always work. Yeah, I'm agreed. It depends on project configuration. It might start rebuilding stuff. But usually it works. It's always not a guarantee, as I said, yeah.
And I think, so with these generated tests, is it possible to run only one? So maybe if you have some issue with just one test, could be useful to run only one, but not all.
I actually not sure, because if you run this whole suite, I guess you will be able to select only one test. But if you, for example, have a clean derived data, you just have nothing, you have a clean project, you won't have a stack of recorded tests, which will make you just launch the whole suite at least once, and only then you will see those tests and you will be able to run them one by one. Yeah, only this way.
Hi. So it's really interesting approach that you presented. And I wonder, how do you handle cases when, for whatever reason, one preview disappeared? I don't know, was removed, added some condition by accident. How do you handle that?
You mean how we handle like the images that are not deleted from the repository, or if like
It's like additional thing, but more like if the preview disappeared accidentally, when you have generated or written test cases, you have like the second level of checking. In this case, you just miss that one. Or do you handle that by
I can
process?
only say that this is something that is kind of part of code review process. So because we don't have any automation for that yet. Actually, we might consider doing that, but for now we don't have any. Yeah, so we can rely on code review process, and if you have changes in UI and you change in the previews, but you don't see any changes in snapshot tests, that may like mean that the developer who was making that merge request hasn't finished his job.
And one more, if you don't mind. So you either missed or you didn't say like for how long you're running that approach, and I wonder what you learned. Is there something you would like to improve? What problems you have?
Yeah. In like cross-platform team, we've been running that, I don't know, maybe for maybe 7 or 8 months. In iOS, maybe a bit less. So we kind of adopted that in macOS first. We had much more issues with macOS actually than with iOS, because there's no simulator on Mac, and you have just to improvise how to add snapshot tests out there. But aside from that, I don't know, maybe actually to make those tests stable between between architectures, between Intel and M1. Yeah, that's the main issue that we had. It was interesting to know how it made just changing your Mac or CI from Intel to M1 can simply affect your whole test suite. Yeah, that was really surprising one.
Thank you for the presentation. One question: how do you decide on the like which devices basically you are going to run your CTP tests? I'm asking in terms of what is the like criteria depending upon that you choose your devices.
Yeah, we don't have strict policy written about the device lists that should be tested. It's pretty usual. You always pick one large iPhone, you pick some smallest device that you support, which is like obvious iPhone SE, and you have to pick some iPad. Yeah, and if there's something critical, which is, I don't know, some home UI, which is like the like foundation part of your app, you will add some extra things like landscape mode, or for example, like 1/3 of the iPad and other stuff. Yeah. When it comes to the keyword, well, we don't actually use devices there because we only have one device, and all devices are configured programmatically. Yeah. So like we have hard-coded sizes, hard-coded scales, traits, and all of the stuff, which gets applied at runtime to the test suite, to the test case. Yeah, and that device kind of behaves differently for that exact test case that we're running.
Well, it's kind of related to that one, but basically, how do you configure the devices? Do you use the framework configuration, or do you use your own configuration with Swift previews?
Yeah, we use the framework configuration. it was a bit extended, but with, I don't remember actually, I feel they have some devices, but not for layouts. Yeah, so we just use, like you can say for this framework that I want a snapshot test. It can be either device size, so it will be the size of the device that you're running on. It can go size to fit, which will be like the size that is capable to produce. And it can be fixed size. So you can just say, I want it like 325 on 700. But you can just also hard code that as a device. Like a device iPhone 7, which under the hood will still operate like size with some specific size. Yeah, and same goes for things like trade collections and other stuff. It also applies based on the device that you specify.
So based on that one, you get because I did the same for the Mac. So I basically create my own configuration for the Mac resolution, and you can run the tests as is a Mac view using the multi-platform development.
Basically, yeah, but we don't have much UI code as multi-platform in our case. It's more about some core stuff related to like text checking and suggestions, producing and so on. Yeah, so we actually have like our own UI parts, but some tools and some shared code we still like share between us.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you use TCA because you mentioned point 3.
Unfortunately, no, because, well, first of all, we don't use SwiftUI much because we only kind of started adopting it in our mostly UIKit project. So, and we already have a pretty big code base to start with TCA. I used to work with Redux, like a pure Redux with UIKit, and enjoy those times a lot, yeah. But I don't know, maybe if I would start some project, I might have started it with TCA as well, yeah. But
I really disliked it when I used it. It also caused lots of problems, like crazy problems. So I was just curious if anyone else has really used it because I hated it too.
Nice one. I honestly enjoy the Redux approach, like the Redux idea itself, rather than TCA, all the framework that they produce, because I didn't had a deep dive inside of it. But I would rather just have some, like a storage of all the business logic, which is fully testable and which is written purely with pure functions. Yeah, but all the UI stuff will still have to be written like old MVVM or MVC approach, just where you get some data, you don't care where, you just get data, map it on some view model or props or whatsoever, and you just put it on UI. And the UI layer just shouldn't depend on your architecture, it's Redux or anything else. Because if you switch from UIKit to SwiftUI, you already just start messing up.
One more thing came on my mind. So you already showed previews with UIKit, so probably use some not usual approach for this. And usually previews are provided as a part of production code. So it usually comes near the view itself, and so it should be part of production. And it doesn't work in unit test. So where do you actually keep these previews? So is it part of production part or some separate models? Or
why it should be a production part? Just to clarify, maybe like you just create a view, right?
If you by default create the view,
yes.
So it provides you the view,
yeah.
And down
yes.
after the view, it provides this block with
yes.
preview. So
you define it as debug only. With
by default, they don't do it. So
we just edit a snippet which is like shareable between projects. So you just have a quick snippet creating a preview, and it's always a debug. We don't have. If you ask if we have automation to check that, no, unfortunately. But it's something that could be automated, either some Swift-lint rule or anything else.
Usually the next thing that comes, so if you want to provide some special states of your views, so you probably need some mocking for this. So like to mock some of stuff, get the proper state of the view. And if it's production part, it means that these mocks also should be somewhere in production. So that's why I'm asking.
Well, I think, wouldn't they be strict simply by the release compiler? I feel like they're just going to be strict and they won't be a part of this, yeah.
Yes, so the risk that you could mix the stuff. So if you use something from these mocks, eventually by mistake from production part, in this way, like
Yeah,
not
well-
so safe with this stripping.
Yeah, but we still have only like we have protocols everywhere. We just create a mock. It starts with a file starting with mock, and you don't usually use it anywhere. You just inject it directly into the view without some sort of builders or factories, because then there is some chance that you have mock. But even then, I don't see much.
Just to be clear, so the mocks actually in production part, right?
They get stripped. Or
strict, but
Yeah.
anyway, so
Just wanted to add that preview providers are by default stripped, all of the code. And the apps not built, they get stripped. And if you use these preprocessor flag like if debug and you wrap your mocks in it, then actually your build would fail if you were to leak a mock into your production code. So you never actually run the risk of leaking a mock into your production code because it simply wouldn't fit. So just make sure you wrap everything in debug.
if you don't wrap it,
Yeah,
then
if you don't
it's-
wrap it, then basically the same.
yeah, I would suggest use some static analyzers for that. Yeah, any 15 rule will easily just with regex you find the preview and just warn the developer.
Last question. Thank you for the presentation. My first question is, does your snapshot test include the rotation of the device? And did it require special attention to implement the rotation of the device?
Yeah, well, snapshot tests are static, so you can just capture animation, which means if you make a snapshot, it is already like turned away, which is all the landscape. So yeah, and we do that by like changing the size, passing the right trait collections. Yeah, and it understands that it should be landscape. Mostly it is done on keyboard. I don't know if there are some slides for the keyboard. I feel I'm missing some, all of them for the landscape, but still, we have keyboard which looks completely different because you get an extra size on the left and the right, which is empty. So we have to do that only for the landscape, and we have to test it. Yeah, and on all devices as well, and all sizes. So yeah, we just manually provide the device, and that's all. We don't, rotate simulator. Yeah.
So it doesn't require any, okay.
No.
Okay. My second question is, can you walk me through the decision steps that made you, we need to automate this snapshot test. What made you snap?
The snap, this is that exact snap when you're like, oh, why I should write those tests? So many tests, unit tests, integration tests, backend integration tests, some UI tests, and then snapshot tests, and you're like, okay, we'll cover only the most important things. Then comes another developer, okay, I will cover less important things, and any other stuff that may come in people's mind. So as a team lead or like a person who is responsible for coverage and product quality, you just decide, okay, we need that just to, even though everyone is writing tests, you're still gonna have additional assurance that it won't be missed. You won't miss some test case added just because you, for example, running out of time during the release or some bug fix and so on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. Very great talk. And if you have further questions to Roman, please him around. We have 10 minutes break, and then we continue with the second talk from Jay.